Secondly, you can have my neck. And you can have the upper half of my body. I shall refrain from offering the lower half of my body because the knees wouldn't stand him in any stead. Thank you all.
What a moment for Frank Worrell.
Legacy is the fact that cricket became a better game from that particular series and from the things he did. You always need a captain to leave a legacy of some kind, and Worrell left one that just underlined that people who get onto a cricket field, should be a sports field, but I'd only talk about a cricket field, they should play the game hard and fairly and with good humour, and to do things that make it for the future a better game. I think that's what Worrell did.
Good afternoon, one and all. This is WESN Content Capital, Face of Sports, and as you would have just heard and seen in a small tribute to Sir Frank Worrell, this show today is dedicated to talking about Frank Worrell with Miss Vanessa Bash. She is an author, a well-known journalist as well. She has a column every week in the Trinidad Express. She joins us. She would have written the biography recently of Sir Frank Worrell. It's called Son of Grace. We're going to put up a little caption of it shortly, Son of Grace. This is the name of the biography done by Vanessa, and she joins us. Let me welcome her. Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you.
Vanessa,
very nice to be here.
What drove you to do this, or this biography in the first place? What drove you?
Well, it's a long story. It came about because I had been looking at a number of West Indian cricketers when I did my MPhil, which was finished in 2007, and it was about the journey towards West Indian identity through the eyes of cricketers. And so I had looked at a number of autobiographies and biographies by West Indian cricketers. And Frank had stood out for me as one of the people who had represented the West Indies in not just in cricket, but as a statesman. So in 2015, I was approached by Baldwin Mutu, who worked at the university campus, where I was also working as editor of the UWI Today paper. And Baldwin was part of a Sir Frank Worrell Memorial Committee, which had been set up to pay tribute to his name and to do things in his honor. And he tried to persuade me to do a biography of Frank, and eventually I agreed. But then it took its own turn, and I went off and did it practically on my own. And it took me maybe 5 or 6 years of doing the research, following up on Frank, and trying to pull together material to write this biography.
What was the most difficult part for you?
There are no records. There's, typically of the Caribbean, we don't have archives, and we don't have records, and people don't collect data. So it was really a matter of a significant amount of legwork, in the sense that I had to track down things, talk to people who knew him, and that was a really small number of people because, of course, this year marks 100 years since he was born. So to find his contemporaries was challenging enough, but to find them with the presence of mind, the faculty still intact to remember things was also another challenge.
From the perspective of getting information and sourcing information, when you decided to do it on your own eventually for circumstances or because of circumstances, what sort of biography did you think you were going to write? Was it one centered on cricket? What can I tell people as they look towards purchasing the biography in the future? Was it one centered on cricket? Was it one centered on his life? Was it one centered on the sort of leadership skill that he had outside of cricket?
I was very clear from the beginning that I was not writing a book about cricket.
Okay.
It was going to be a West Indian biography, a biography of a West Indian man who had made a significant contribution to the development of our society. And to me, it was primarily that, and the idea of Sir Frank as a cricketer was, of course, not going to be excluded, but it was also, just because that was the realm that he graced. So it was always foremost in my mind that this was going to be a biography. Many things, when I started looking at data around Frank, there are a lot of stories and a lot of statistics. You could easily see where, what matches he played in. You could see the results. You could see accounts of those matches because, of course, we've always had a lot of reports of matches. And so that was easily available. What I don't think that people knew was who was Frank. And when I say who was Frank, I mean who was the man behind all of this. And so that became, to me, the center of the biography, trying to unearth as much as I could about his life, the way he lived, and what he represented to the sense of West Indian identity.
Son of Grace. How did you come up with that name? Because you mentioned the word grace a few moments ago, so it leads me to ask you the name Son of Grace.
It came to me for two reasons. One is that everywhere that you looked for any kind of information about Frank, in terms of the descriptions of his batting, he was described always as an elegant, stylish, graceful player. In terms of his statesmanship, he was described as somebody who always conducted himself with grace. And I would say that it came to me because it happened that his mother's name was Grace. Mm. And the more I learned about her and her personality, the more I felt that Frank was really very much like her. And so it just came to me that, he is the son of Grace.
What stood out for you the most in all over the is it 5 years from start to finish to complete? Is that a fair 5-6 years?
Roughly, yeah. Yes.
What stood out for you the most about Sir Frank Worrell?
One of the things that struck me is that no matter whom I spoke to, everybody loved Frank. Hmm. And there was nothing that anybody said that suggested that they did not respect him as a player, as a captain, and as a leader. And he was a natural leader. And so it struck me that this was one of the people who have some form of celebrity, but there is no division in terms of how people see them. Normally, you have people who love or hate.
Yes, divided.
If we look, for example, at even in the competitive arena, you would find people get divided into camps, right?
Yes.
For example, people would tell you that they were either a Sobers man or a Kanhai man. They would tell you that they were either a Sparrow man or a Kitchener man. You know, there are divisions, and yet Frank did not fall into any one of those categories. People just loved him.
Any reason you found in your investigation why he was so well loved and well appreciated?
Well, Frank was very charismatic. He was a charmer. He was very diplomatic. He was not given to public outbursts. He was always conscious of himself. As he often said, when you represent the West Indies, you are an ambassador. And so he always carried himself with that quality, that statesman-like quality. So yet he was not aloof.
Yeah.
He was not the kind of person who did not mingle. He loved to socialize. He was a very social creature. And so he was able to charm people because he was able to get in and mingle with what would be the grassroots people who supported cricket. In the period of the 40s and in the 50s, there was a lot going on, but West Indies cricket had become one of the things that has still seeks to identify us as a people. And so Frank had that touch, that what you might call the common touch. And so it endeared him to a very wide swath of people.
In terms of at that time that you mentioned, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, the Caribbean, to many persons in reading, would have appeared to have been, let me use the word, divided, if that's a kind enough word, or segregated based on race. And so Frank Worrell, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was acknowledged as the first black leader of the West Indies team. Do you feel that in any way helped or assisted in the love for him?
He was always seen as the leader, even when he was not captain,
Okay.
from very early. I mean, you have, in the first place, preceding Frank, you had Larry Constantine, who was also himself a very beloved cricketer and who represented the West Indies and also went on to have a very large career as a champion of black causes, of West Indian causes after his cricket. He was Lord Constantine. And then there was George Headley, who also captained for one series. Sorry, not even for one series, for one test in the 40s. So there was there were those precedents. But Frank was the first one to have been officially appointed captain. And that was something that from the early 50s, people had been advocating for him to lead the West Indies on the basis of his natural talent and his leadership qualities. You see, players on the team felt that Frank looked out for them, that he looked out for their interests, which was not quite the same because during the 50s, in the early 50s, for example, when the West Indies were in London, at Lord's, for that first win on English soil in 1950 at famous match. John Goddard was the captain and Frank was on the team. And there was a lot of talk that, you know, if it weren't for behind the scenes counseling for Goddard, they would not have had the kind of success that they did, not just in 1950, but subsequently during the 1950s. That you have a team, and of course, during that time, the 3Ws came to being. In fact, they came to being in 1950, when the media dubbed them the 3Ws. And when they, as a trio, they mesmerized everyone. And so you had Everton Weeks, you had Clyde Walcott, you had Frank Worrell. And they were the superstars. They were the superstars of the West Indies team. And so it became more and more obvious to people that Frank should lead the team. And you have to remember, of course, the context of that is that in the 1950s, there was a lot of very explicit racism.
Yes.
And there was now a counter movement or a bigger movement as the islands in the Caribbean were all working towards the idea of independence and self-governance. As you might remember that in 1958, it was the formation of the Federation that didn't last long. But again, this was the context, this was the background in which all of that was happening on the cricket field was being, well, I should say maybe the cricket field was reflecting what was happening in the political mood and of the West Indies at the time. So there was a lot of lobbying for Frank to lead the West Indies team. And I think a lot of people will associate Frank becoming the captain of the West Indies for that 1960-61 tour. They would attribute it to the efforts of CLR James, who was campaigning for Frank to be captain instead of Jerry Alexander. But the truth is that by then, by the late 50s, from 1956, he had entered the University of Manchester to do a degree. And he was very focused on his studies there. So when the West Indies Cricket Board approached him to captain the team, he declined. And he declined twice when they were touring. I think it was Pakistan, and there was another tour right after that. And he declined because it would have interfered with his studies. And so he actually got his tutors at the time to write to the West Indies Board, asking them to allow him to finish and continue his studies. And so he did. So it wasn't true to say that he had been overlooked for the captaincy prior to that tour of Australia. It was just that when the Australia tour came, he had finished his studies.
Because somebody recently given us here, I know, is in Son of a Grace. I don't want you to give us everything, obviously, because we want people to purchase the book at the case maybe, but that's just something else. But I want to ask you as well, from your perspective, how difficult, Vanessa, was it to get information from some of the Caribbean islands, particularly Barbados? Because, you know, there is a tendency where people say Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, always a competition. You as a Trinidad and Tobago journalist trying to get information from Barbados, how was it easy? Did they accept that you were actually going to write this biography of Sir Frank Worrell?
Well, I think my in was that I first got in touch with Everton Weeks.
Okay.
And Everton, of course, he and Frank were friends right up to the end. And he worshipped Frank. And so when I got to speaking with him, he was very happy to talk. He was also very guarded because he didn't want to give away things that he thought might have been private, in the sense that they might not have been acceptable information for the public, given the inner workings of things. And so, but Everton and I became very good friends until he died. And it was because of that I was able to hear a lot of stories from Everton. He was able to clarify a lot of things that had only been, talked about, and he guided me in where to look for material. So mostly, I would not say that there was any greater stash of information about Frank in Barbados than there was in any of the other territories. What was different was trying to find people who knew him. And that was the challenge. All through, that was the challenge.
I digress here now. Why do you like cricket so much?
I asked myself that very
well, I hope you can give me the answer here.
Well, I think I would just like to say that I think that like a lot of West Indian people, you grew up with cricket around you. And my family, my uncles, my cousins, everybody, I grew up around the Orangwes Savannah. And they had little clubs and they would play on weekends. And I also had a lot of cousins and we grew up playing cricket among ourselves. I don't think that I had any particularly strong attachment to, or stronger attachment to cricket than any other young child at the time. But I would say there were two things. You had put up on your screen a comic book.
Yes.
Cover.
Yes.
That was actually how I first encountered Frank, through that comic.
Okay.
So there was a comic that as a child I saw, and the one that you have up now.
Yes.
I think was a republished one. But the original,
the one before, yes.
Because there are two different ones.
Yes.
The original one was that one.
Yes.
Was one I had seen, and there's an interesting story with that. If you look at the cover, you will see that there are some scribbles on it, names. And this was actually a comic book that had belonged to these three children. I don't know them. In fact, I have spoken to one of them since I found the comic, or the comic was found and given to me.
Okay.
And I could not find it anywhere. I've been asking and asking, has anybody ever seen this comic? And so it just came into my hands. And so, but you were asking me about my interest in cricket. And two things. One, I was in primary school. I suspect it was 73 or 74. Gary Sobers was touring and came to the premises of the school. As I said, it was in Orangwes, and there were these cricket nets right outside the school, and we were all lined up there watching him bat in the nets, and he hit a ball so hard it flew straight into the nets and hit me in my stomach. Where I was standing up. He pressed up like all of us were against the chain link fence. And I remember thinking, oh my God, Gary, I just got hit by a ball by Gary Sobers.
Wow.
And it was like, a trophy,
A trophy of pain.
A trophy of pain,
All right, I want you to hold that. Because I want to come back and you're going to take a short break because we have to go for the 3 o'clock news, and we'll come back talking with Vanessa. We will be back. We take a short break. This is the Face of Sports, and we are looking ahead to the Son of Grace. It will be released in Trinidad and Tobago later this year. We don't know all the details, but we'll get more. We'll be back.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. U.S. Homeland Security Operation seizes cache of firearms destined for CARICOM countries. roulette players shot dead in San Juan. And regionally, Brazilian president calls for stronger relations between CARICOM and Brazil. Now for the details. A recent initiative spearheaded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security culminated in the confiscation of 318 firearms, 314 magazines, and nearly 20,000 rounds of ammunition that were en route to CARICOM member nations. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley shared these details during a press briefing on Wednesday, following his participation in the 46th CARICOM Heads of Government Conference. Operation Hammerhead, as it was dubbed, unfolded in the 2023 under the auspices of U.S. Homeland Security. Prime Minister Rowley revealed that the operation scrutinized over 500,000 shipments during its 3-week duration in September 2023.
With the operational establishment of the Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, because we did form that last year, a Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, there has been an increase of information and intelligence sharing between the authorities in CARICOM member states and the United States of America, and the establishment of trends through information and greater awareness in dealing with trafficking. We had some interactions and sharing of personnel and data with various task forces from the United States. And while the operation has been completed, activities have been normalized and continue remotely.
Tragedy struck in San Juan on Wednesday evening as a shooting incident resulted in the loss of one life. The victim has been identified as Lindy Aaron, a resident of San Juan. According to reports, Aaron was engaged in a game of roulette at a mini-mart located on Pisgah Road at approximately 7:20 p.m. when he was approached by two individuals wearing masks. Without warning, the assailants opened fire on Aaron before swiftly fleeing the scene in a red Nissan Note. Despite efforts to save him, Aaron succumbed to his injuries at the scene of the shooting. Upon investigation, law enforcement discovered 40 spent shell casings, further underscoring the violence of the incident. In regional news, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has made a call for stronger relations between CARICOM and Brazil, noting that Brazil and the region are confronting similar challenges and can learn from each other's experiences. He also pledged his country's support to vulnerable CARICOM countries, promising to assist the region with food at a reduced cost. Addressing CARICOM leaders at their 46th regular meeting in Georgetown, the Brazilian president decreed the lack of air, land and sea connections between Brazil and the region, saying it is a major stumbling block that affects trade between his country and CARICOM states. He said they want to pave their way to the Caribbean and will open corridors capable of meeting supply demands. Well, that's it. News on the hour on WESN. I am Sira Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back, welcome back. We are talking about the Son of Grace. It's a biography on Sir Frank Worrell, written by Venetia Bash. When we left, we heard she took a ball to her stomach from Sir Gary Sobers. What happened after?
Well, it hurt, naturally.
I would think so, yes.
But it really, I mean, I was a child. I must have been about 7 or so. But it was one of the experiences that were common, I think, to children.
Yes.
We were exposed to cricket in practically in and outside of your school. There was cricket in the school. Because there was a lot of kind of pastoral land surrounding a lot of the schools then, you had a lot of cricket as part of the backdrop of your daily life. It wasn't like you had to go searching for it. It was just part. It was cricket and football everywhere you turned. I always say that I grew up with the soundtrack of football and cricket because of the Orango Savannah. You could hear during the hot sun days, young boys and playing cricket in that blistering sun. And when the place started to cool down on the evenings, the football fellas came out. And so there was sport practically around you all of the time. What made me get more interested in cricket was one is that my younger brother, whereas my older brother played cricket and played cricket well, my younger brother was like me. He just followed things, followed cricket, and he was like an encyclopedia. And so you could ask him anything, and he would know. And so I used to, be matches on TV, and I would always be asking questions, trying to find out how far I could push him, and before he would get irritated. But he never did. He used to answer my questions, but it made me see cricket in a different kind of way, and as I got older and got more involved in the writing, I felt that I would like to write about cricket. And I think the trigger for that was Michael Manley had come to Trinidad to relaunch his book, The History of West Indies Cricket. And I had been assigned to go to interview him. And we talked about the book, we talked about that. And then Sunil Gavaskar was in Trinidad that same year to launch his book, which had been done with, I think it's Clifford Narayan Singh. And I was also sent to interview him. And just talking to them about the cricket made me start to see that, hey, I could write stuff about cricket. And that made me feel that I could write about cricket, even though women were not doing it, but that I could write about a different element of cricket, which was the thing that attracted and interested me the most, which was to try to work out all the external kinds of contexts in which cricket is played. I've always been fascinated by our West Indian history. And it just seemed to me that we were full of good sports writing in our national newspapers, but there was a lot of match reports and a lot of technical descriptions of games. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write about the players, what their body language, where they came from, their backgrounds. And so that was how I got drawn into it. Unconsciously, I suppose I was following the kind of tradition of maybe CLR, who would write about cricket in a social kind of context. And that was it. And I felt, and of course there was a lot of, I wouldn't say direct resistance to my writing about cricket.
Why?
But
why would there be resistance?
Well, I would imagine what I discovered, because I was pretty naive about it. I just doing my own thing.
Right.
And discovered that people found it that I was stepping out of line.
Because you are a woman?
To be entering this man's world, yes. Yeah. And what did I know about cricket? I couldn't pull any credentials out. A lot of the women who now commentate on cricket or write about cricket are former players, people who have an established background in that. so that the commentary or the broadcast, the journalism aspects of it actually are secondary to their playing credentials. I was the opposite. I did not have any kind of cricket credentials. So people thought I was an upstart. And so I don't think I was welcomed into the fraternity. I used to go into the press box and to sit down and watch matches. And practically nobody took me on. And when I say that, I mean they virtually ignored me.
Wow.
Or treated me kind of like, like, who is she? What's she doing here?
Even among your local peers, the local journalists as well?
Surprisingly, yes. And I would say there were maybe two very striking exceptions, Tony Cozier and Reds Pereira.
Okay.
The both of them...
Two of the best at the time.
Really welcoming. They were helpful. They tried to show me things. And at a broader level, I would also say that Michael Holding and Ian Bishop were also supportive.
Again, the best.
But, so they had that sense of, well, equality in a sense. They were not going down that road. And I would say It took a while. And I will say this. I remember when I started writing columns in the Sunday Guardian, and Lennox Grant was the editor then. And I had written a few on cricket, and he sent me a note that said the novelty of a woman writing on cricket has worn off and I should stop.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you respond? Did you respond with a note yourself?
I was very taken aback.
Yeah.
Very
I am now that you
disappointed.
told me that, yeah.
Yes, and well, that was the space that I was in.
Yeah.
And remarks like that would make me kind of pull back for a bit, but it didn't stop me. I don't recall how it panned out in terms of my direct response, but I do know that it floored me. Because it was surprising. So, yeah, so those were the early days, beginning to write on cricket. But that's a very, very long time ago.
I know. But that's why, so let me ask you this. Do you believe that if you had a chance during your time to actually play cricket, from a woman's point of view, you would have actually played the game?
I mean, I used to play, yes, but I have to be realistic.
Yes.
I'm hopefully uncoordinated. I would never have made anybody's team.
all right. Good to be honest, and we know you are. So that's okay. All right, so now you've led right to the point, because I noticed you've stayed away from it. But he said, but I am not going to stay away from it. In 1996, at the time, I distinctly remember reading, hearing that there was this young lady attempting to become a member of the Queen's Park Cricket Club. And I was wondering, wow. I just returned actually from England, studying. And I remember saying, wow, okay, this is interesting. Tell us about that.
Well, it came about because Queen's Park Cricket Club was celebrating its centenary.
Yeah.
And I was sent to interview the president, well, to talk to the club about it and their celebrations. And so Jerry Gomez was the president of the club at the time. And we had a really nice interview. And at the end of it, I asked him about female membership. And he said, well, it's never really come up because no member has had and I remember his word, the temerity to propose a woman for membership. So, of course, my eyes widened. And I said, well, I didn't say anything. He just shook his head and he said, I suppose you're going to apply. And to me, to be quite honest,
yes.
I had no idea what that would unleash.
Yes.
Because I merely thought that one of the things was that it was not a rule. There was no rule that said no women. There were rules that debarred children under 14 and dogs when there were matches going on. But there was no explicit rule banning women from membership. So I simply thought that, this is something that would have been a relic of old times that has never really been addressed. So I will apply. And I found a ready nominator, that was Desmond Allen. And he nominated me, and the thing caused a stir. So a really quite an unexpected stir for me.
Yes.
Because I thought that they would just say, oh, we should do something about this. Instead, 6 months passed, and I heard nothing from them. And then I think, if memory serves me right, that after 6 months, if you were not considered, you had to reapply. So I reapplied. And they told me, or I was told, that if that didn't work, I would be blackballed, which was something I had to even learn what that meant. I wouldn't be able to apply again. Well, then I started writing columns about it in the newspaper, and I kept it up. I tried at first this was in 1996.
Yes.
By 1997, I think the Lords, the MCC, were now also entertaining the vote to have women into the club, because they did not before. And what had persuaded them was that there was an aspect, and as these things usually go, it had to do with money. I think they could not qualify for money from the, I think it was the Lotteries Board.
Okay.
And unless they had removed that discriminatory law. So the members went to vote and eventually decided that they would. But in the meantime, I was saying to Queen's Park, listen, the MCC is going to vote to let women in. Don't be the last. It's inevitable. Rather than fight, why don't you just do it? But they wouldn't, and they didn't. And so, of course, the MCC let women in. Queen's Park still wouldn't. And there were all kinds of, at some point, rather than just ignore me, and because I had been campaigning, I would say things like, so Brian Lara his mother is not allowed to come into the members' pavilion. The Minister of Sport at the time was Pamela Nicholson.
Right.
I said, a Minister of Sport cannot come into the members' pavilion. How do you all reconcile that? I got things like, well, we don't have female toilets at the club. I don't know if you might recall that in 2000, the year 2000.
Yes.
At the annual Calypso competition, 3 Calypsos were sung about me. One, not any of them were particularly nice.
Yes.
One was called Woman is Cross, and the composer, who sang with a wig and makeup, said that his lyrics were that I should just join a nunnery and stop chasing down the QPCC, and that I was chasing Brian Lara, and a number of things like that.
Right.
And all of that, I mean, I just kept on going. And this was one of the things that's why I also started writing for international cricket websites and newspapers and magazines, was because they picked up on that dispute, or that what was going on, that campaign at the Queen's Park Cricket Club. and began to interview me about it. And then that, having established those communications, then they asked me to write for their websites. So I was one of the first, I think, women writing for what is now the Cricinfo website.
Did you send a copy to Lennox Grant?
One does not waste time on petty things.
All right, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Andre, you're too wicked.
Yes, we know.
No, I'm just saying that, it was a whole complicated environment. It was like, let's say Frank was looking to become a Black leader in a time when, right?
Yes.
When the whites would not allow the Black players to have the same kinds of rights. For example, Everton would say that he remembers very well that when the divisions were gentlemen against players, it really meant that the Black players could not even use the same entrance into the ground as the white players could. And he remembers that. And that when they were on tour, they were actually made to carry the bags of their white, team members.
Teammates.
Yeah. So I'm saying here I am in Trinidad writing about cricket and not being allowed. For example, if I went to Queen's Park Cricket Club, as happened many times during matches, to interview someone, I could not go into the pavilion.
Yeah.
The guard would not let me come in. And we are good friends now because I tease him about those days, but he could not. And I would have to sometimes go and stand at the foot of the stairs and ask, could you please find so-and-so person and ask them to come out and meet me? Because we have agreed to meet, to have a discussion. Now, you have to remember, this is in the days before cell phones.
Yes.
So I couldn't call somebody and say, I'm outside. And so, I mean, there were all these things, and I wrote about it.
When in 2006, am I right? Is it 2006 when everything came to head?
Thereabouts. It would have been because in 2007, the West Indies hosted the ICC World Cup.
Yes.
And in about, I think it was 2004.
Okay.
When Wes Hall was the president of the West Indies Cricket Board, they had set up a Cricket World Cup board to plan for this 2007 event. And he asked me to sit on the board. And maybe he did it strategically to have a woman on the board, but he did. And so when there were all these discussions going on, long before the World Cup itself actually started, when there were all these discussions going on, I kept raising issues about a ground being qualified to host matches. And I would pull out the ICC regulations and pull out this that says there has to be no discriminatory practices, no discriminatory rules. And that because of those things, Queen's Park would not qualify to host matches. And I just made it very clear. In fact, I wrote to Queen's Park quietly and said, listen, if you all don't do it, I am going to make a big deal of this.
Right.
You have to let in women. And so they did. And what they did was they let in women. I was told that they had let in maybe 20-something women.
Okay.
And then they contacted me and asked me to come before their selection committee.
All right. How was that?
To make a case for becoming a member. And I wrote back to them and I said, why should I? You do not ask that of other potential members. And why do I have to make a case? I said, and I wrote to them and I said, since 1996, I have applied. And not only have I have applied with all the reasons that I think I should become a member of the club. Why do I have to come and make a case anymore? No, thank you. And at that point, I was persuaded by Desmond Alum again, who said that, listen, you started this, and you should see it through. And there are a lot of people to whom this would matter. And what actually triggered it for me was that at that time, my daughter was at St. Augustine Girls High School, and she told me that the class had different projects to do, and that on the whole back of the classroom, they had pasted up all kinds of my columns on it, and they had written things, they had done their own research about these kinds of things of female membership in clubs and things like that. And it apparently, it surprised me, but it made me feel that you never know who your actions might influence, and that I owed it to them to keep going. And so that's how I did, and I was accepted for membership.
So you went to the interview?
Yes.
And it was okay? Yes. It was okay? It was a formality?
It was full of mixed...
Men only, obviously, right?
Right. It was full of mixed views.
Okay.
And I could feel people bristling that I was just in the room with them. But it was approved. And that was, I mean, look, Queen's Park since then has had a female CFO. And I think there are a lot more women in the membership of the club.
All right, I want you to hold that up. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more about that because we have some photos. And Venicia will explain them courtesy of the Queen's Park Cricket Club because they're going virtual with a museum very shortly. This is all about Sir Frank Worrell. We're talking about the Son of Grace. We haven't yet got into the details as we can, brief details there of when the book will be launched, where and when. We don't know all those details, but we know it will happen. We know it. In fact, when we come back from the break, we'll talk. We take a short break, we'll be back.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Insta. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
My name is Carl Media, and the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Welcome back, and let's remind everyone we are looking and talking about the Son of Grace. It's a biography on Sir Frank Worrell, written by Vanessa Bash. And of course, very shortly, all things being equal, we'll know more information on it. But I wanted to show that the Queen's Park Cricket Club and Venetia, they have mended total fences. Everything is good right now. In fact, it's so good, courtesy the Queen's Park Cricket Club. We have got some photos, and Venetia, can you explain as we put them up?
Sure. The Queen's Park Cricket Club, this is, of course, the last ball of that famous tie test in Brisbane, Australia in 1960. The Queen's Park Cricket Club is actually working to produce a virtual museum. And I think sometime later this year, probably around June or July, they're hoping to do a launch of it. And so what they have been doing is digitizing a lot of the photographs that they have in their possession. The club president right now is Nigel Camacho, and he has been very enthusiastic about this project. It's a good one, and I support it. And I think they have been really working hard to digitize the images and to present them so that the public can see online and be able to have access to a lot of the material that has been stored in the Queen's Park's, well, sort of their archives.
So these are just one of the photos that we have from them. I know there are some other photos as well, also from Queen's Park Cricket Club, through the Queen's Park Cricket Club. So we thank them very much and for allowing us to be able to show some of these photos all about Sir Frank Worrell. All right, Vanessa, let's come to the real crunch of the matter. If people in Trinidad and Tobago or people watching us online, as the case may be, are interested in getting their hands on this biography, how can they do that?
Well, the book, since it was published in November, October 23,
yes,
a few months ago, has been available online from the publishers, Fairfield Books, but online in the kinds of places that you would normally get books, Amazon and things like that. Within the next, I would say within the next 2 weeks, we should have copies on the island, so that they will be at bookshops as well. We definitely are looking to have a launch in April, early April. And so we're just trying to finalize some things before I can say anything definitive.
Official, I understand.
Yeah, but roughly it is April, and in a couple of weeks, books should be here.
Is there going to be a launch overseas as well?
Actually, as we speak, it is being launched in England.
Okay, okay.
The publishers are doing a launch because they have also done another book by, his name is Ricky Elcock, former Barbadian bowler.
Yes.
An autobiography. So they're launching that as well. And another book from David Woodhouse, which is called Who Only Cricket Know. And that is a book about the 1954 tour of the West Indies by England, led by Len Hutton. It's a very famous tour in West Indian history. And so these are 3 books that are being launched this evening. Well, I think now.
All now, yes, in
England. And so that is a very exciting thing. And I'm hoping that as the year goes by, we will be able to launch it in the other islands as well. Certainly, sorry, I was just going to say that this being the centenary of Frank's birth,
right.
I remember last year when Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, had said that she was a cricket fan herself, and that she was determined that his birth date, which is August the 1st, that they would have grand celebrations in Barbados, and she was hoping that there would be a documentary film on his life. And well, I am hopeful that she would consider the book as the basis for any documentary. But as I said, I know that in Barbados they are very excited about the idea of the centenary of his birth. So I'm sure there will be events planned to honor him, which may or may not include the launch of the book, but we are hoping that there will be a launch there as well. And of course, the Guyana is going to be hosting the CPL matches, and the president, Irfan Ali, has been talking about his his cricket carnival. And I think that would be a nice space to launch the book as well. So I'm hopeful that it will not just be launched in Trinidad, but Frank was a regional person. It should be all over.
Interesting, you would say April. I know that on April the 19th and the 20th, the CARICOM is hosting in Trinidad and Tobago. I actually received the information today. CARICOM is actually hosting in Trinidad and Tobago a conference on West Indies cricket on April the 19th and the 20th. So a lot of the Caribbean leaders will be here on April the 19th to the 20th. And that's, you reminded me, I now remember that I saw that release today, came to me. So
yes, I had a brief look at it a little bit earlier.
Yeah. So
but I don't have any details on what is happening. One is always hopeful when one hears that there's some attention being paid to the state of West Indies cricket.
So we'll see what happens. Which leads me to ask you this. I know you would not have had a chance, obviously, neither I, to meet Sir Frank Worrell. But if you had a chance to meet Sir Frank Worrell, what would you have told him?
That's a hard question. I think I would have just liked to tell him that the work that he has done, what he has contributed to the West Indies, was and has been an enormous contribution to the development of our civilization. I was 6 months old when he died. So that is an opportunity lost. And I think one of the things that people have asked often, he was only 42 when he died, when he succumbed to leukemia. And it was a very rapid deterioration. And people, it's like Bob Marley.
Correct.
They die so young. It's like Martha Marshall, 41. These things leave you always wondering, what would they have done had they continued living till what we call a ripe old age? If you don't mind me saying so, people have asked, what do you think? Would you speculate? And I don't know, because his trajectory after his cricket suggested that he was already being regarded as a Caribbean statesman. And naturally, the way we look at things, we would imagine him going into politics.
Yeah.
He did not want that at all. He really wanted, because it seemed from things that he said, that he was very disillusioned by politicians. And so his commitment, the thing that he wanted most, was to mentor young people. And so when he joined the university campus, he worked first in Jamaica, and then when he died, his last day was spent at the St. Augustine campus. But when he did that, he actually said that what he wants to do is spend his time with young people, mentoring them. And I think, given the state of not just our West Indies cricket, but our entire Caribbean civilization now, I think he would have made an enormous contribution in that regard. I don't believe that you have to be in politics to lead. I don't believe that you have to occupy a particular office to be a leader. And I think it is in the acts, the things that Frank said, the things that he did. He genuinely spent a lot of his time mentoring young people. And I think that is something that we really need more of now in the region.
Completing this biography, what did it mean? Because you mentioned 5 or 6 years, but I hear the passion in your voice. I've seen the passion in your writing too as well on cricket. Cricket has evolved, obviously, now, as we all know. Do you feel, and I know this is a rhetorical question, but I'm still going to ask you, do you feel, yes or no, anyway, that enough people know and understand the value of Sir Frank Worrell? And I'm talking, generally speaking, I don't even want to say the younger generation, because younger generation can be defined in many ways. But do you feel we as a generation know?
No. Short answer, no.
Yeah.
And it was a very sad thing for me, because as I said, when in my own growing up, Frank Worrell was, of course, before my time. The people who were in my time was Viv Richards and that fantastic bunch of players. So why did I know about Frank? And I knew about Frank because I have a natural inclination towards research, towards history, towards, understanding these things. So I had to actively pursue knowledge about Frank. And that's the point I want to make. We say, we complain, our young people don't know, or we don't know our past.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is that because where are they going to find it? How are they going to find it? As I was saying, when I was growing up, you could not escape things like cricket and football as active games going on. It seeped into you. In those days, how did I know about Frank? From a comic book, from primary school. What I'm trying to say is our schools don't have that kind of material anymore. And you have to be able to tell stories. We used to have sessions, especially on hot days, when the teacher would take the class outdoors under the shade of the saman trees that were close to the school. And we would sit there on the grass, and he would have a chair or she would have a chair, and they would tell us stories. And a lot of them were stories about folklore and, things that were relatable to us because they were telling us about our people and our lives. And they would read for us. And I don't know that this happens anymore. I know a lot of people complain that in primary school, for example, they don't have structured sports for the primary schools. They don't have, I think they call them games masters, as they did when Frank and people like him were at primary school. I don't know, and I've heard people say, and that's because there are more female teachers. And so the female teachers do not go down that road. I don't agree with that kind of thing. But I do think that there's an absence of teaching, not in the sense of rigidly going through textbooks, but because we don't even have textbooks that incorporate stories about our people. I have been a passionate advocate for that how do we expect them to know? How do we expect, for example, our young cricketers, let's just say, put them in as a category, our young cricketers, how do they know their lineage? How do they know what they have come from? When we have talked to them in public about their performance levels, and we invoke the names of our legends, we don't do it in any other way but to quarrel with them, to beat them on the heads with it. This is not how you teach them how to appreciate where they have come from, because now when they hear it, they know they are going to be treated, reprimanded. They know they're going to be knocked because you can't live up to this past. And so they resent, I think that a lot of them actually resent hearing about the legends because they are used as whips. And I don't think that is the way to go. So we ask, how do we get young people to know about creatures like Frank?
Correct.
And we can't just expect them to know it. We have to incorporate it into their daily lives in the same way that, as I said, the cricket was around us, the football was around us.
Has cricket, sorry to cut you, Benicia, but has cricket, what's the word? Let me use the word. Has cricket diminished in its value in the region?
As sad as that is as a prospect, I think it is. It has diminished, and I think it isn't dead.
Yeah.
And a simple illustration of that, of the inherent value and the life that still breathes, is what happened when Shamar Joseph took 7 for 68 in that match in Adelaide.
Yes.
And what happened? It just excited the entire cricket world.
It did.
And not only the cricket world, people I know who don't follow cricket are wits and they hear this. Did this happen? What's everybody talking about?
And of course, the advantage now in this time is they can see it. Because of social media, they can actually see it on their phones.
Right.
So immediately.
That's right. We have now that blessing, really.
Yeah.
An advantage. Or you hear people who would talk about having to listen with their little transistors by the players when the match is playing in Australia overnight, and there's this, you don't even have television, you had radio. And now you can miss the match and go and look at it again, and you can see it. So I think, I do not think it has the same kind of resonance that it did once.
Yes.
But I also don't think it's dead. And as I keep saying, the example of that the blood still courses through our veins, and what we want is to see excellence. I think that would be the thing that would, more than anything else, no amount of marketing can bring you to it if you are not going to be thrilled by the performance levels. And when I say that, I still believe that West Indians look at matches. And yes, of course, we want our team to win. But when we see them playing well, even if they don't win, we feel proud.
So Frank Worrell, having done all the research that you've done, if he had a choice, of course we all know he died at the young age of 42, what do you believe he would have liked to have been his legacy had he been able to live longer?
I think that he would have wanted his legacy to be not confined to the parameters of cricket. I think he would have liked, you see, one of the things that he carried was also in his lifetime and in his early years, the notion that being from the Caribbean, being a Black person in the Caribbean, meant that you were inferior.
Yeah.
And a lot of people assimilated that and absorbed it as part of their identity. And he fought against that. And I think that what he would have liked is to see a West Indian civilization where people were filled with a sense of pride in who they were and their identity, and who could then carry themselves with dignity. I think that would have been a fitting legacy.
From the perspective of Sir Frank Worrell, from the perspective of the Caribbean people, when you conclude what we would have just heard you talk about, this biography on Sir Frank Worrell, does it give you a lift, putting it under pressure here, Venicia, does it give you a lift to write another biography? Everton Weeks come to mind only because you mentioned that you spoke with him as well. I'm just saying, you know, because that's where the history is going to be. Nobody's going to do it for us. We've got to do it for ourselves, obviously. Nobody's going to write history about our people.
I would like to do some more writing about our West Indies cricket history.
Yeah.
I am not sure about tackling any more biographies at this point.
Okay.
I remember, and there are, by the way, and there is an autobiography too, actually, of Clyde Walcott. The Everton Weeks has had something done on him. And to be fair, there's quite a large collection of biographies and autobiographies about West Indian players. Some of them are more in-depth than others.
Yeah.
And in the past, a lot of them were ghost-written. And so they lacked a certain kind of texture.
Humanity.
Well,
that's my word, not your word.
Well, I would say if you have somebody who is from a different environment entirely, and I'm talking about mainly from England.
Yes, of course.
Writing words to put into your mouth.
Yeah.
They can't really capture our
cultural differences.
Yes. That's what I think has been lacking. But it doesn't mean that these things are not impossible or that they don't exist. What you are asking me is if I would launch into a biography. I'll tell you something. I said at the end of it, that I felt a sense of withdrawal when I was finished.
Right.
And somebody was asking me how it felt. And I said, well, I've been sleeping with Frank for 5 years now.
Wow. All right. All right. So let us switch from that sleeping and ask you this. How many chapters are in the book? How many chapters? Just give people a little idea. How many chapters and which chapter you would recommend? Give a little hint of a chapter that you feel people should read. And we're talking about the Son of Grace.
As the author, I think people should read all of it.
I know. But any stands out that you feel the public might want to know more? Yeah.
That, as a matter of fact, I would say that it depends on your area of interest.
Okay.
Because there are a number of chapters that cover a lot of different elements of his life. Some of the personal elements, some of the cricket, some of the university elements, and when I say the university, I mean when he worked at the university, but there was a chapter that covered his years studying at the University of Manchester. There's also a chapter which I think would be, to most people, it's not common knowledge, and that was that he had considered going to tour South Africa in 1959.
Okay.
And yes, so I won't give away.
No, we definitely have to get it. I'm waiting for the book to arrive too. So go ahead. Yes, agreed. No, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So there, as I said, it depends on where your interest lies.
Yeah.
His life was. He was 42, but he had lived so much in that time.
Yeah.
When Everton Weeks died, he was 95.
Yes.
And I remembered saying that we could not ask any more of Everton. In those 95 years, he had packed so much. And he himself had told me once that you would think I'm 150. Given all, and I would say it was the same for Frank. They lived very full lives. And I think to me that is really an astonishing thing, because it isn't simply what they accomplished. It is about how many things they fitted into their days and their years. And when you think about how many people are now living what I perceive to be empty lives, days that are just repetitions of each other. And I think that accounts for a lot of the despair in the region now. And people are filled with a sense of emptiness, purposelessness. And those are among the things that, I know it may seem like I'm digressing.
It's okay, you're not. It's okay.
But I really think that these are the things that are at the heart of what we do. And if we were to talk about cricket, for example, and we talk about the performance levels of the West Indies teams and the teams that are being built or coming together as young teams to emerge from the different kinds of leagues and tournaments and setups that exist. Unless part of the training and part of what they are exposed to has more to do with understanding what life is about and what they want, what is their purpose, what do they feel they're here to be, instead of just bending their heads down into their devices. I really think that, we have to get past that. And that would have been Frank. That would have been his approach to a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's about how you living your life.
I want to say thank you very much. As you say, you got to know Frank so well over those 5 years. So I know you, as the case may be. So we thank you for that. I mean, really, I look forward to it. I've seen some of the excerpts because the publisher had contacted me, of course. So I've seen some of the ideas and that kind of thing. And so I know it's a must read for anyone, not only those who love cricket, but as you would have heard today from the author, for those who just love the life that he would have lived and possibly could have lived as well. As we go, I must tell you, when he said that soon you'll be receiving a call from WESN, Keaton Shah and his team. They love a recent column that you've written, but I told them emphatically that I will be talking to you first, and they will talk to you after me about a column that you would have written. So they will call you to talk with you here again on WESN, but after me. I made sure and told them without hesitation. They would come after I have spoken to you. So again, I thank you very much for the time. All the time you have given us. It's really been entertaining and revealing. Even to those in the back who have been listening, I've never heard the men behind me be so silent. They don't listen to a woman and say nothing so often here. So they have been totally paying attention. So that says something for what you have said today. All right, so and I'm hearing in my background, it was very good in my background because they normally are in my ears talking. I wasn't talking, they weren't talking, we were listening. And we thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the time you gave us today and the extended time, because I know I only asked you for an hour and we extended the time. So I thank you so much for it. All right, totally appreciate, and we'll stay in contact. And I said, look out for a call. It'll be from Keaton Shah, obviously, and his team. Sarah will no doubt call on his behalf. So they'll contact you. Again, I thank you very much. And remember, let's put it up. The Son of Grace, you will hear more about it in April in terms of availability, maybe in the next 2 weeks. And once it's available, I'll give you notice here on WESN of where you can purchase it, certainly. So again, thank you very much. Totally
Thank you very much for having me, and it was really very pleasant.
It was. Thank you very, very much. And as we go, much thanks to Neil. Let me thank Neil, the hard-working Neil. Much thanks for him. He would have put together all the graphics that we would have seen. So much thanks to Neil. Much thanks to Josh. He's doubling up his work both in producing those promos and, of course, working with Rodney in the technical area. Rodney and Keaton, the very same Keaton Shah, Sean Michael Small, the hard-working Ryan. This has been WESN Content Capital Face of Sports. And we say, Son of Grace, get your copy. Goodbye.
WESN.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sarah Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Port of Spain City Corporation employee found in possession of marijuana. Police nab suspects after robbing tourists in Port of Spain. 2 suspects arrested, vehicle seized, and regionally, Sizzla Kalonji gets U.S. visa reinstated. Now for the details. A 38-year-old employee of the Port of Spain City Corporation found in possession of a significant quantity of marijuana was apprehended in St. James. Colin Joseph, residing in Roxburgh Street, Indigo Martin, was taken into custody by law enforcement officers who intercepted a blue Hyundai Tucson. He was operating along the Western Main Road near Clarence Street, St. James, just before 4 a.m. on Thursday. Upon conducting a search of the vehicle, authorities discovered and confiscated 12 bales containing a total of 300 kilograms of tightly compressed marijuana. The operation was